So I have weighed out 100 grams of cocoa nibs. I'm going to grind them to chocolate liquor in my Indian spice grinder, and we're going to see what percentage of cocoa butter we obtain. A couple of minutes in the grinder will get me this texture, which is sufficient for my purposes. I could get a much smoother chocolate liquor if I let it run for a couple of minutes longer. So I have my 100 grams of cocoa liquor that I've made in my Indian spice grinder on the induction. So I have my 100 grams of cocoa liquor that I've made in my Indian spice grinder in a pan on the induction cooker. I'm bringing it up to a boil, and then I'm going to add some water. Now in this case I've actually added water to the remains in the bottom of the spice grinder so that I can be sure to get every last bit of that 100 grams out. So I may need some additional water as well. So when you add the water, what typically happens is you start to split the emulsion. And the cocoa butter starts to separate from the liquor. So I've added a little bit of additional water. You don't want to add too much at a time, or you'll have to boil it down for quite some time before you start to see the cocoa butter separate. A little bit more water. You can see you're starting to get a little slick of cocoa butter forming on the surface of the water. So our emulsion is starting to break, and we're releasing the cocoa butter. And I may find that I need to add a little bit more water. Just play it by ear. Starting to get some little puddles. Of cocoa butter forming. Notice how it's getting kind of globular. And you're seeing the cocoa butter start to separate out in larger amounts. And I'm starting to get a little pool there of cocoa butter. Get myself a little spoon. Just to help with the removal of the cocoa butter. When I tip the pan, I tend to lose a little bit down the side of the pan, so I'm hoping I'll lose a little less with the spoon. So again, can you see I'm starting to get quite a bit of cocoa butter collecting. And the heat and the broken emulsion just seems to help coax that out of the mass. So, I'm going to try to spoon out cocoa butter. Of course, the induction cooker will beep when we haven't got the pan attached to the surface. Spoon for now, and I'll go back to little bits where aren't cocoa butter back out of there. Again, you can see more and more cocoa butter seems to be forming or separating. Not actually forming, it's been in there all along. Maybe this time I will try pouring it out. Turn this off while I do that so it doesn't drive us nuts with the beeping. Over I come, pour out what I can. A little wipe to the outside. Ouch, that's warm. Back onto the heat. Back down to a fairly low temperature. And already more has collected. So essentially you're just going to continue to do this until you're not seeing any further significant amount of cocoa butter separating from the mass. So I will continue to do this, and we'll see when we get to the end what is the weight of the cocoa butter that I've removed, and that'll help us figure out what percentage we are getting out of the beans, out of the nibs. Figuring that nibs contain about 50% cocoa butter. We certainly don't expect to get that kind of a percentage out. I think we're hoping for probably about half of that, so maybe 25 grams out of this 100 grams of cocoa butter, of cocoa nibs, which is plenty of cocoa butter to be used in our EZtemper to temper our own bean to bar chocolate using our own chocolate liquor. I did add a little bit of extra water as I was going along, and it seemed to be not giving me up as much cocoa butter as before. But I have obtained 28 grams of cocoa butter from my 100 grams of nibs, which is a pretty good return, all things considered. 28 grams will allow me to temper somewhere between 2.8 and 5.6 kilos of bean to bar chocolate. I could probably coax another couple of grams out of here if I had the patience, but it's not what I'm known for. So there you go. That's how to get cocoa butter out of your own chocolate liquor so that you can be a 2-ingredient bean to bar manufacturer and use the EZtemper to temper your chocolate easily.